I do know that that as far as coming into the field, I felt a whole lot of what everyone else now calls imposter syndrome, because I was like, oh, I better fake it like I know this stuff, because otherwise people are gonna find me out, and then no one's gonna want to hire me or anything like that. So it's this like preservation type thing, but at the same time, it's okay. We all bring unique qualities to this thing. And at the time that many of us were coming into this, and when the web was really becoming a mainstream, like profession type thing, there was no training for it. Like we were the view source generation, right? Right click, view source, and I mean, crap, you don't even have dev tools with syntax highlighting it. You just look at the raw code and you're like making these connections between class names and IDs and styles and scripts. And you're like, oh, this is how it all comes together. This is very cool. And then, then we start getting familiar with it. And then we bring all of our own backgrounds into this thing. And it becomes this like beautiful quilted picture of different backgrounds and people representing different ideas and innovations, and in making a more democratic web. Continues to make me super stoked about working in this space.
All right. Hey, welcome everyone. So, this is another episode of Mental Health in Tech. And I'm super excited for today's episode because I think I'm anticipating a couple of things that are going to be touched on, which like I find super interesting and intriguing, and also like we just have someone who's also like someone who's I've been following for quite a bit as well. But yeah, so before we introduce the guest and I hand over to other Schalk, let's just do kind of what we usually do. I'm probably not going to introduce myself and who I am. Like, if you've made it this far, you probably know who I am. Otherwise, go listen to some earlier episodes. But yeah, it's like, so I'm just going to dive straight into it and kind of do a check-in in terms of how I'm feeling. So I'm very happy to announce that after promising for 3 episodes now that I'm going to start taking up therapy again, I actually went yesterday, which, yeah, I know. Like, but it's so I got home and my wife asked me, how was it? And I was like, it's horrible. It always is when you just start out again, because it's like, it's all these things that you are just suppressing, and then someone kind of forces you to talk about it, and you're like, oh shit, yeah, this is a thing. Oh man. Yeah, so it brings all of that to the surface, but yeah, like it's good. I think I have a lot of like, it's strange. It's like but just getting stuff out there, you kind of get a lot of this feeling of peace about it. So I kind of have that where it's like, okay, I've just said this out loud now. Yeah, so I have that, but then also it doesn't take very long for other things to kind of fill that space again. So now I'm just anxious about other things now. So yeah, but yeah, so that's good. That's promising. Kind of feeling excited about that. It's been a while since I've been in therapy, so yeah, excited to see where it goes. But yeah, also there's a reason why I'm going. So like, I'm not in the best place. So yeah, not doing great. Just like emotionally, but kind of I'm hopeful and excited about kind of just taking up therapy again. Yeah, so that's where I am. Then I'm happy to hand over to Schalk Neethling, and he can tell us all about how the new job is going, and then he can introduce. I'll maybe just jump in quickly before we hand over to the guest, just to give a bit of context in terms of how he ended up on the episode. But yeah.
Yeah, so other Skulk. So for the first time in, wow, it feels like a year, but and maybe it is. I'm actually doing well. I don't have too many complaints. There's stuff that's stressful, but it's under control, which is good. Like, I haven't felt like things were under control for months. Um, can see my beard is even thicker. I haven't been plucking myself like a chicken, like I said in the previous episode. So, yeah, things are going really good at the new job. Like I had a choice between two, which first of all, I felt really privileged in this like state of the industry to have choices. Um, but I definitely made the right choice. Nothing against the other company. If anybody from them are listening, like that would have been sweet as well. But I definitely made the right choice. Like it's the weirdest thing. So it's a company in Germany that it's an agency, but they're branching out into not just doing development, but doing the entire thing, right from ideation right through to delivering a final product. But the thing that I find super interesting is it's still a small company, like 55, 56 folks. And it feels like when I joined Mozilla, it has very much this feeling of a bunch of people that sit around the same campfire, share the same ideas, share the same view of the world, but there's enough also people with different views that challenge one another, and it's okay to do so. So it has very much the same cultural feel, which means I feel right at home. Um, a bunch of people that actually love what they do. They're not just there for a paycheck. Paycheck's important. I have learned that very, very clearly over the last couple of months. Paychecks are important, but it's great if you also enjoy what you do and you work with people that also love what they do. So it's always people sharing, like, oh, I read this cool thing, or I saw this cool. So, yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm extremely grateful to be where I am right now. And I have a wooden table, so I'm touching it that everything will just keep going well for a while. That would be lovely. Um, but I'm glad we have this going again. Interesting, something that we talked about beforehand is like so many ideas, not enough spoons, all that stuff. And like since I've started at Factorial, I've made a deliberate choice of subtracting. It kind of started, interesting enough, by stumbling on this podcast episode where this dude that wrote the book Subtract actually talked about all this stuff, and I started reading the book, and I was like, yeah, I need to be a little bit more deliberate about what I do with my life and my time and all these kinds of things. So I've been making a deliberate effort of subtracting away and really focusing on things that first of all I can do properly because I have enough time to do so, but that is actually really meaningful to me. And not trying to be the person who just does everything because that wasn't working anyways. So yeah, but we'll probably dig into some of that during the course of this. So yeah, and super nice to meet our guest, and I'll hand it back to other Schalk for just a second so he can give it the context that we need.
Yeah, I have some idea. I have a lot of thoughts on that subtracting thing. So like, yeah, I'm keen to dive into that as soon as possible. But yeah, so today we have Geoff from. I've always kind of considered him as kind of like so there's this little small website that some people that listen to might have known about, called CSS Tricks, like very, very, very obscure website in the world of front end development. That was sarcasm, by the way, if you're listening. Like CSS Tricks is like such a big part of my own journey into front end. Like I literally, it used to be one of those sites where I would just like every day hit the homepage and like see what's going on. So it used to be CSS Tricks, Smashing Magazine, which very like, what would be the word, serendipitously where Geoff is right now, and then also List Apart by Jeffrey Zeltman, and so those used to be my big three ones. So I kind of I did some writing for CSS Tricks back in the day, and that's kind of how I met Geoff. He was kind of like I think it would be safe to say like the editorial force behind like CSS Tricks, kind of like the man behind the scenes who kind of like kept everything going. I think a lot of people kind of see, like, obviously know about Chris Coyer and his connection and so forth. But I think Geoff was very much the guy who was just running things day in, day out. And yeah, and so, like, if you know about CSS Tricks, you probably also know about like some developments with CSS Tricks over the last couple of years, which I guess we'll dive into as well. But yeah, so basically how Geoff ended up here is I remember he at some point, I don't know whether it was an article or like on his own blog or something, he shared quite openly about his own mental health struggles and so forth, and his own journey with mental health in tech and so forth. And um, I I kind of submitted some ideas for possible articles to Smashing Magazine recently, and so kind of Geoff and I started talking again, and I was like, "Hey, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember you spoke about this," and I kind of said like, "Hey, do you want to come chat to us on the podcast?" And like he was super keen, so yeah. Um, I think that's maybe as good as an intro as I can muster. Geoff, I'll leave the rest up to you. But yeah, like so, you can decide whether you want to do your intro first and then your check-in, or the other way around. But yeah, over to you.
Cool. Thanks for having me, guys. This is really awesome. I love that you do this, by the way, and the fact that you start off with a mental health check-in, like that's rad. It's a different, way to go about a podcast, and you know, way to like create that personal connection with other people. So awesome. Like hat tip to you guys for that. I think that's a really super vulnerable thing in an industry that doesn't really reward vulnerability all that often. So awesome job there. Yeah, I'll start with a mental health check-in. Why not? Yeah, I'm doing good. Good is good. But yeah, that doesn't mean that there aren't good days and bad days. We take both of those as they come. But right now, it's like I think things just feel like they're in a good rhythm with work, with family, with just my personal interests. And because we all have these like different sides of our lives and personalities, right? And sometimes it kind of feels like we're managing separate worlds, and that can lead to a lot of burnout if you aren't good at context switching, very quickly. And right now, I just feel like everything's just so predictable, just so in line, and just I can march forward with my head high and not really have to, hit too many obstacles. Yeah, when you were talking about, just the fact that, you have only so many spoons to give. And, that's a great metaphor that I believe that, you were talking about Chris Coyer, and he did a summary of someone else's post that was talking about, the number of spoons we have. We should probably link that up in the show notes or something, because that's a really good piece of context. Um, but yeah, right now I just feel like I have the right amount of spoons, and I'm not being asked to, to hand over more spoons than what I actually have. So I feel really well, really balanced at the moment. And, kind of like you, other Schalk, that doesn't happen too often in my life. It kind of feels like, I'll go through long periods of, bleakness, and then something turns or changes or clicks in my mind, and then I go through a season of good stuff. Is it seasonal affective disorder? Doubt it, but it's just the way that like our minds work. And we have different ways of managing that, which I'm sure we're gonna dive right into. But for those of you who don't know me, my name's Geoff Graham. I work on a site called Smashing Magazine. I'm one of the editors there, and I've but perhaps where most people know me from is the work I've done over at CSS Tricks, where I spent 8 years. And yeah, I just do a lot of technical editing and writing, but really it's just me behind the curtains, learning some like really cool stuff from really smart people, and then just making them sound as good as possible to publish on the web for other people to learn from. So I kind of see myself as like, a little spoiled, right? Like I get to read these cool things before anyone else. So can't really complain there.
I have to say that's something I miss. I miss from the world of academia. I used to be kind of in tertiary education for a long time, and I think that it finally just ground me down, like the bureaucracy and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna take a step away from it now, especially now with everything that's going on with like AI and ChatGPT and post grad papers. It's such a dumpster fire, and I'm just like, I don't want to be in that space right now. But that's something I miss from it. It's like, and I guess it's the same for you as well. It's like you're literally getting paid to do research and learn things, and like, oh, I don't know. Like some people might look at that and be like, ah, crap, now I have to read this random ass book about like this topic. And I'd be like, oh, yes, I'm getting paid to read some super nerdy thing. Yeah, so I missed that. Yeah, but also I have to say, talking about books and super nerdy books, like, yeah, like even behind me here, like is like a ton of like Smashing Magazine like books. You'll see like down there, like I have two of the design system one. Don't ask me how I ended up with two of them. But yeah, I have a ton of Smashing Magazine books back here. Like such a similar to CSS Trek, such a big part of kind of just like my growth as kind of a as someone in this world. Yeah. So I think like a good place to start would be just talking about that initial post or article that you wrote about your own mental health struggles and so forth. Would probably also be worth linking to that as well in the show notes. So I think that's kind of like we've been interacting for a while, and like and I think kind of that's the first time, and I think I actually commented on it as well, and I'm like, yeah, cool, like I also struggle with these things, like yeah, like kudos for the honesty and so forth. So I think my question is, like, have you shared openly about it before, or was that kind of like the first kind of step you took to talking about it openly? And if so, like what kind of prompted that? Because I do find with everyone, especially everyone that we have on the show, or anyone who talks about this openly, there's more often than not like a deliberate decision that I'm gonna actually be open about this. Because I think if you just follow natural incentives without being deliberately open about it, like you're going to be incentivized to try and not disclose too much. So I'd be curious whether that was the first time you shared about it, and like also if it was or if it was not, kind of what prompted you to be like, okay, I'm going to talk about this openly.
Yeah, I really should have reread that post before I hopped on here, because I wrote it back in, I think, 2016, and which was a long time ago. Especially in like web years, right? Where like everything's times 10. And I, yeah, that was an intentional decision. I just called that post depression, and yeah, it was a deliberate decision to talk about it openly for the first time. And no, it wasn't just one of those things like, oh, I'm looking for something to publish on my personal blog, No, it was a personal decision that came up in my personal life, and my personal blog just felt like the right place to come out about it. Where not only do I have like colleagues like you reading that stuff, but also like my mom, and other people. So it was really a sounding bell you know, for everyone that I know in my network. It's kind of akin to sending an email, to everyone and telling them, I tend to do that in my blogs as opposed to sending, or to reaching out to specific people. I'm very bad at texting and emailing and stuff. But I can write a blog post, darn it. So that's what I did. And the whole crux of it is this, is that most people that meet me just think I'm so freaking happy, all the time. I smile a lot. I tend to be chipper. I like being encouraging and building other people up. I just think that that's just a good thing to do in life, especially in an industry that is so easy to feel, imposter syndrome and torn down in different ways. And like, you're not as good as someone else. No, we're all good. We're all trying to figure these things out. The web's a big place. Um, and but people just didn't know that deep inside of me, there's something else. And that really what I've been doing, or what I had been doing for a number of years, is just putting on a facade, something I've done since I was maybe 10 to 12. And I finally got exhausted of it. I got burned out, and it was the first time I had really experienced true burnout in my life. I come from a very highly productive family, down to my dad being ADHD, and just a family full of founders, who started big companies and went on to be super successful. And so there was, this whole pressure to to be high performing and to be really good at what you do. And there was no like ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was either you're good or you're not. And so I just put on this like little fairy tale of an existence on me to where I am that perfect person, and I can play that part in whatever role and be as adaptable as I can. But what that ends up doing at the end of the day is it kind of turns you into a chameleon more than a real person. And at the end of the day, I just felt this heaviness to me that I couldn't shake. And it wasn't just a heaviness, but I knew I was in trouble when I couldn't stop thinking about suicide. When every day was an ideation, and not just every day, every hour. I could barely get out of bed, but I did, and yet I'd still put on that happy face. I'd still be in back to back meetings. I'd still just let that armor take its little chinks in there, but not actually like be a real person. And I was tired of living that kind of gilded existence. So I decided to come out about it, just talk about it, and just say, "Hey, I'm not okay. I don't need you to worry about me, but I'm tired of pretending like I'm perfectly okay." And this is me saying I'm not.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I kind of like get it a lot as well, because I'm also I would consider myself someone who's also quite goofy and has like a very like strange sense of humor. And like I think there's definitely been instances where like I've spoken openly about this, or I've made a comment about it, and people thought I was joking, or I was. So I remember at what was it like? I think it was at DevConf the one year. I can't remember her name now, but one of the other speakers, like I think she she I can't even remember, but it basically comes down to like she made a comment about, oh, she's on new medication or something, and and I jokingly said, yeah, no, don't worry, I have an entire slide on all my meds in my talk, which I used to do. I don't now anymore, because I found that people just want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the. But usually when I introduced myself, and this is one of the reasons why this kind of podcast also started, is I used to have a slide about like, okay, cool, yeah, just like I kind of like my goals in terms of destigmatizing this, and like I'm on medication and whatever. And what would happen is people would just ask questions about that, and not the actual talk that I gave. And I first and foremost, I realized, okay, it's probably not fair to everyone else who came for the actual topic to have an info session on mental health. But given that this keeps on happening over and over, like we should probably have a dedicated space to talk about this. But anyway, so I made a comment about like, oh no, don't worry, I have an entire slide with all my meds. And later on in the conference, I think at some point we actually spoke again and whatever, and like I think I shared openly about kind of my own struggles and stuff as well. And she said like, oh, she thought I was taking the piss out of her. She thought I was being like, like making fun of her. And I'm like, no, legit, I have a slide in my talks about. So I think like sometimes like I think how do I say this? But I think people are sometimes like a bit blindsided, like about this aspect to me. And yeah, it's interesting that like that's not something that's uncommon. Like even if we spoke about Russ earlier, he also has such an amazing sense of humor. He's such a goofy guy as well, and yeah, I'm super curious. What's up with that? You have like a lot of these people, and I think it's maybe some of it's maybe a coping mechanism. I don't know what it's like, what it is, but like I guess it's for myself. It's a way of just like I don't know, like it almost feels like everything is so heavy, and just like trying to find the funny stuff, the goofy stuff in the moment, because it feels like at a high level, if you take a step back and just think existentially and think about like even stuff like just the ecological crisis that we're finding ourselves in, and just like it's like, yo man, like this is such a time to not want to be a human. So it almost feels like, it's like I don't want to go all mythal Sisyphus, but the whole thing of mythal Sisyphus is like he gets in that thing, the texture of the rock and whatever. So it almost feels like that's the way of coping with it. Just like in the moment, just finding like little goofy things, little funny things, just to deal with all this like existential stuff. But yeah, thanks for coming to my TED talk.
It's a good one.
Yeah, like sometimes I impress myself. I was like, wow, that wasn't too bad. But yeah, like I'm curious, like also I want to dive a bit into, because I don't know the answer to this, your own background. Like, is your background more in like the editorial stuff and you just kind of ended up in the tech space? Or is it more in the tech space and you just kind of figured out the editorial stuff as you went?
For me, I consider myself just the dumbest, luckiest person, to ever fall into the web, right? Like I was graduating college in, what, 2000, 2003, like right around there. And, we're still building table-based layouts and all this stuff. And no one's really teaching web development outside of computer science. And I'm just at a little tiny liberal arts college up in the Pacific Northwest of the US here. And I was majoring in international economics, and why did I major in international economics? I don't know. It looked impressive, it sounded like, and I mean, this is going to be a recurring theme. It sounded like the right thing to do. At no point did I ever feel like I had any direction or purpose to go into anything. I was going into whatever sounded like it was going to check off the box, make parents happy, make sure I fulfill my citizen duties, of being educated and having some sort of something that sounds like it could be career focused. Although I don't know any international economists in my life, so maybe it's not a very employable field. Anyway, I'm not using it, but I happen to be working right after college, two places actually. One, Starbucks. Yeah, with a $125,000 degree, working at Starbucks. That was awesome. And then I was also interning at the World Trade Center over there in the Seattle area, and it exposed me to keeping up their website. That's what they wanted their interns to do, right? That's still an intern job in lots of places these days. So I got to play, quote, webmaster for a little bit and actually open up Dreamweaver and see how, like these sites are pieced together and how they come together visually and how that visualness like ties back into code. And I was like, oh, that's really fascinating. So I cut a little bit of chops there, not to say that like, oh yeah, hey, everybody start with Dreamweaver. That's a great idea. Uh, no, instead, that just exposed me to it and made me realize that it existed. And by the time I moved back, home to where I'm originally from in California, I I was pretty desperate and needed a job. I was I had just recently gotten out of a really big long-term relationship where we were engaged to be married. It suddenly broke off, and so I suddenly just departed for California again, and just found myself sleeping, on floors and with just maybe $1,000 in my bank account, which in California is not going to take you too far, especially when you need to go find a place, to like rent and live. So I did that, and I just found myself in a job, and that job had some web, components to it, and I but I was mostly a copywriter. That's what I really wanted to be at that time. I wanted just to write content. I thought content, and I still think content is king. And I developed like a little freelance deal doing that around 2005 or so. And hey, I had to like build a website to promote that. And I'm like, how do I build a website to promote that? So did, and the first time I put a background on something, I was kind of hooked at that point. Um, yeah, because that's that magic moment, right? We all talk about aha moments when it comes to web development. CSS is just full of them, right? Like mine, in addition to just putting slapping, whatever green color, as a background or something, it was just the fact that recognizing all things are a box. Just like, oh, everything on the screen's a box, and all I'm doing is affecting the box. That's cool. Oh, there's different boundaries to this box. Oh, I get it now. And it just kind of cascaded, pun intended, from there. And sorry, dad joke. Um, and yeah, over time, that just turned into a career in web. So at no point did I ever feel like I was a web developer or a web designer or even a copywriter or anything for that matter. I was a trained international economist, not practicing economics, but working on the web in Southern California. Whereas like a month before that, I was in Washington State doing something, I don't know what, like interning at the World Trade Center and working at Starbucks. Like it was really weird. So all that, jabbering just to say that my background, just, dumb luck.
You'd be surprised how common of a trend that is. I'll do you one better. My background is actually in visual arts, fine arts. Like I wanted to become an illustrator. I studied painting, like technical drawing, like all that stuff. So yeah, I'm like the classic when you talk about like, oh, these liberal arts degrees or whatever. I'm like literally, I'm that guy with a fine arts degree. But like the joke is like apparently at a university, so I have a master's degree in visual arts, and apparently I don't know how it works, but at a university, if you have a master's degree, so you're always qualified to teach or oversee one level below you. So if you have a PhD, you can teach at a master's level. If you have a master's, you can teach. So turns out I was actually grading post-grad computer science papers last year, and I have no formal qualification in it, but yeah, there you go. I don't know how that worked out, but like I know enough about computers and I have a master's degree. But anyway, yeah, so it's interesting. Like I think like even like Schalk Neethling, I think you'll be like yeah, you'll be also surprised if you hear about his background. So his is actually in like classic guitar and so forth. Yeah.
Awesome.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
it started, I was lead guitarist for a death metal band.
Yeah.
We pretty much almost had a record deal.
Band name?
Back in
What was it?
Malfeasant.
Awesome. Metal bands always have the best names.
Yeah. And I mean, I wrote all the songs. I wrote everything, the bass, rhythm, lead, everything. That evolved into classical guitar, which evolved into theory of music, which evolved into composition, and then Flash in the web. So
Keyframes. Here we go.
all
Timelines.
have these like
Yeah.
we all have these fascinating like backgrounds, and I love that about tech is the fact that you don't just have a bunch of people that have this linear progression from like primary school, middle school, high school, university, job. Everybody has these weird winding roads, but strangely enough, not a lot of people talk about that. Like whenever I share how winding my road was, people are like, "Oh, thank you so much for saying that. It inspired me because I'm also like that, and I always feel out because I always see people like I have a computer science degree, and I always feel like, oh shit, maybe I should have done that, and now I'm screwed, that kind of thing."
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to share the fact that most of us don't have a linear path. Oftentimes we come from something that you would never have connected to what you do today.
No, everything that we do here is like related back to code, right? And so we kind of think that code is what we need to like rally around, and some of us didn't come up in code. But again, the web is such a big place, and it needs all the disciplines that it has in it, and it requires that like myriad of backgrounds to come into it and create a web that's for everybody. Because what would a web look like if it was just built for developers, right? It's very cool that the web
Looks like Hacker News.
Burn. No, I do know that that as far as coming into the field, I felt, a whole lot of, what everyone else, now calls imposter syndrome, because I was like, oh, I better fake it like I know this stuff, because otherwise people are going to find me out, and then no one's going to want to hire me or anything like that. So it's, this like preservation type thing. But at the same time, it's okay. We all bring unique qualities to this thing. And at the time that many of us were coming into this, and when the web was really becoming a mainstream, like profession type thing, there was no training for it. Like we were the view source generation, right? Right click, view source, and I mean, crap, you don't even have dev tools with syntax highlighting it. You just look at the raw code and you're like making these connections between class names and IDs and styles and scripts. And you're like, oh, this is how it all comes together. This is very cool. And then, then we start getting familiar with it. And then we bring all of our own backgrounds into this thing. And it becomes this like beautiful quilted picture of different backgrounds and people representing different ideas and innovations and in making a more democratic web. So that's the kind of thing that that continues to make me super stoked about working in this space.
Yeah, like and that's super interesting. Like like even between the three of us, like it's just people who are at kind of like at a place where kind of this wave just started, and like we were placed in a position where we could just ride this wave. Um, and the same with Justin Slack, who's also kind of like one of the co-founders of FETSA. He also has a literature background. So he used to teach at I think it was University of Cape Town. And interestingly enough, his story is like, obviously the university was one of the first places to get the internet. And like he was just like playing around with this internet thing that no one else knew about, and that's kind of his journey. And he was like, hey, I want to do this. I want to not do the teaching thing anymore. Yeah, it's super interesting. But like I also don't envy anyone getting into the space now, because sure, it's I often joke and say that it used to be very inaccessible in terms of, it was very hard because there was no Udemy, there was no YouTube, there wasn't CSS Tricks back in the day. So you spoke about view source, so it was really hard, and you had no resources, you just had to. But like, I think what was nice about that is that like all it took was just like interest. If you just stuck with it, no matter how smart or dumb or whatever you were, you just stuck with it. Like that was the determining factor. Whereas I think now, just because there's so many resources, like it's so much more competitive because everyone has access to those resources. Whereas I think in our time, like no one had resources. So at the very least, you had that going for you. So it was basically how good you were at reverse engineering. But yeah.
Well, I could tell you that as someone who's published, thousands of tutorials online. Yes, I'm responsible for flooding, the whole space with these resources, right? But at the same time, there's fewer entry points for people to come in. So we have more resources than we've ever had, but it's actually harder to get in now because the entry points for beginners has diminished to this point where we've abstracted HTML and CSS and JavaScript to the extent that it requires an engineering background to just to even grok the concepts of something like React or some other JavaScript framework, when we used to just be able to say like, oh, background red. Oh my gosh, that's the aha moment. Okay, I like you can build off of that, but if you have to start building off of like constructing methods and all kinds of stuff, then that's not going to be a hook to keep people in, and it really diminishes a whole audience or like a whole segment of people that could be contributing to the web. So in a way, yeah, the web is bigger and more like awesome than like ever, and we have all these resources to get into it, but we don't actually have any entry points for the true beginner. And what we're seeing is this chasm between, like low code and no code tools that this audience is flocking to, never ever understanding what's happening under the hood. And then you have these people over here decrying these low code, no code things, but we're excluding these people from like from engaging in the first place. So it's kind of like, we have this like clash in the middle between two audiences that just can't reconcile, how to, work together in this thing, because now, we're building tools, in both directions, and only, this widening is only getting wider. But I mean, I guess I could give you a shameless plug here, and say that, like, that the whole idea of, like, focusing back on the basics of web development is something I've been thinking about a lot. I just recently published something at Smashing, about, praising the basics, and talking about the fact that I just released an online course that's purely for people in that in that mode. It's not for, like, you and me, or us here, whatever. It's for the people that ask us questions. It's for your mom who doesn't know what you do for a living, that sort of thing. Just to give people more options to come in, where we make no assumptions about what they know, and don't make them feel bad for coming in empty handed, because that's the way that we all came to this in the first place. So let's open it up, let's celebrate that, and let's welcome people in. That's kind of what, this online course, that I released, called thebasics.dev, does. And I just would love to see even more sites like that, come up and provide even more options for people to enter into the field.
No, definitely.
I mean, I can speak to a couple of things that you said. So I think, for one thing, I definitely, like, just before I jump into the mental health aspect of this, curation is a massive problem. I think we've talked about that multiple times. I think me and Schalk has talked about this before. I've definitely encountered this as part of the Mycelium Network stuff, which is like a community of junior devs. There is so many resources, people don't know where to start, and they keep jumping around. And I have, unfortunately, I want to say, been a front row seat to somebody going through this, and they are now at a point where they have lost all motivation to do this. They were super excited to do this, and they were really keen. And I have seen them go from that to now, where I think they've pretty much given up, because they don't know what's the right thing to learn. They don't know where to start. Once they've done one thing, what should I do next? And the emotional and mental health impact of that is, like, it's palpable. I can see it in their face. I can see it. And I feel bad, because I really wanted to help them. But like the spoons thing comes back here again. You only have so many spoons to give. And when you are, your life is just, like, out of control and all over the show, you cannot, you literally can't, even though it hurts, like, to see somebody and you're like, oh my God, this person really wants to do this. I wish I had the time, because I literally just need a guiding hand, right? They just need somebody
Yeah.
to say, here's the next thing you should be doing. And don't worry too much about this, that, and the other. You'll get there. It's okay. But then the other cool thing that I'm definitely seeing, and I'm definitely going to check out your site that you mentioned and also link it up. But the other day I saw somebody on Mastodon talk about I think it's a small, like, ebook or something, talking about HTML. And I was like, and I commented on that, and I was like, this is awesome to see. Now I feel less like the odd weirdo writing a book about HTML, because
Yeah.
it feels like everybody's like, HTML, who cares about that? CSS,
Yeah.
I never want to write that stuff in my life.
That's not
It's
programming.
complicated. I don't understand the cascade, and I don't want to understand the cascade. Just screw all of that. Just give me JavaScript. And that has all kinds of side effects to when you talk about people in the real world, when they just are working at agencies and stuff like that. It's like, I mean, whoa, that's going to be problematic. But also just the quality and the accessibility of stuff. I mean, if we look at accessibility, this is, again, talks into the mental health aspects of this. Like, the web isn't getting any more accessible. In fact, it's in a lot of ways, it's getting worse. And I fear what's going to happen with some of these auto-generated, if you know what I'm hinting at, these auto-generated websites, what the WebAIM, survey is going to look like at the end of this year.
Gosh.
Seeing that one of the biggest problems is still missing alt text. So, but anyway, I think, like, there's so many things here that we can jump into. I think before we jump into anything that I said now, which is just weird because I talked about all this, I want to go, like, way back to something you said almost at the beginning, which was this thing about pretending to be happy when around other people, but in truth, you're actually in this emotional pain. Because I mean, I've also done that. People either see me as one or two things. Like if they don't know me at all, they would think I'm some kind of snob, like drawn back kind of person. And when they get to know me, they're like, "Oh, you're such a friendly, upbeat person." I'm like, I'm neither one of those.
That's my
Like
experience with you. No, just kidding.
you know, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm somewhere in the middle, and all over the place. But I'm wondering, we talked about in the last episode of the podcast. I mentioned the fact that when I was laid off uh, for about 3 weeks or so, I hid it from my family because my wife was going through a really difficult situation, and I felt like sharing this at that point in time was the worst thing I could possibly do. It was one of these like a bunch of a series of unfortunate events, that just made me feel like I'm doing the right thing for not telling anybody. I wonder if sometimes um, this pretentiousness, let's put it like that, of pretending to be happy when you're not, if it's a way of protecting the people around us. Like, no, 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 I'm good. I'm fine. Because like when you wrote that post, you were like, actually, you said like, I was telling people that this is me. I'm okay. Don't worry about me. But this is really who I am. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, and then Schalk, you as well. Like when we do these things, like hide stuff from people, pretend to be in a position like a mental space we're not, is it a form of trying to protect the people in our lives to not have to worry too much? And then should we be doing that? Because I know what I did was the wrong thing. I was giving a proper talking to by both Schalk and the guest in that episode. So when I was editing it, I got the message. So I'd love to hear
He
from the two
learned
of
his
you what you think
lesson.
about this. Yes, I did.
You see, this podcast really is beneficial to you. It does serve you at the end of the day. I love it. Yeah, of course, I think that there is an aspect of protecting the people around you, but more than that, I do think it's a self-protection thing as well. But yeah, I think that at the end of the day, like when we hide these things from people, yeah, I mean, I know that when I don't tell my wife something, about my feelings in that moment, I eventually do at some point. But it's usually because, oh, this is an inconvenient time. But we know that it's never going to be convenient to talk about our feelings. It's I mean, there's so many other like real life things, and you can't see me, but big air quotes, real life stuff that is seemingly more important. um but I think it's more of a self-preservation thing too, because showing that sort of weakness shows that we're not the perfect people that we project ourselves to be. And um if we do that, then we're going to let everyone know just what fakes we are and how we still don't know what we pretend to know, or that we're still learning, or that we are probably just not good at in general, and that's okay, but we don't let that be okay. Those are things that we have to hide. And so yeah, I do think that there is a measure of protecting other people, but if I'm being honest with myself, at the end of the day, I don't want to admit it to someone else because I don't want to shatter the glass of how they see me.
So from my side, yeah, I guess like this is something that's so unique, and it plays out so differently in everyone's lives. But I think there's definitely an aspect for me that is like I don't, what would be the word, like um I don't like, because I've definitely sometimes I see like I think when I started out being like, okay, I'm going to talk openly about this, I'm like, all right, like a radical honesty, let's go, like, and someone would ask, like, hey, how are you doing? And I'd be like, I all thought like about killing myself every 5 minutes, man. Like shit's crazy. And like, I'd be like, oh, okay. So I also realized like sometimes it's not fair to other people for me, because it's, like, I actually think some people just don't have the experience and the tools to go into those areas, um, and I think that's fine. Like I think a lot of people are so far removed from just the idea of not wanting to live that like they don't have the means to even have a meaningful conversation about that, because to them it's such a foreign idea. Like, no, life's amazing, and like, why would someone not want to live? And yeah, and I think it's like I definitely realized at some point that it's not fair of me to just be like, all right, let's go, we're going, you're coming with me, like just dragging them into that conversation. Yeah, it is tricky because like it's also, you also want to, the problem is that it's stigmatized. Yeah, like and that sucks, and it sucks that we can't have open conversations about this. It sucks that you had to start your article by going like, all right, let me just put this out there, you don't have to worry about me, you know um as if it's like something that needs to be fixed,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it sucks that you had to frame it as like, I just want to be open about where I'm at. Yeah, that sucks, man. Like, and it feels like it's sometimes it's like an uphill battle, just like talking about this stuff openly. But yeah, I think for me, like the part where I do kind of feel that I like for myself, for my own reasons, I don't want to be honest about this, is because I think it definitely, in my mind, it definitely feels like, what would be the word? People take you like there's always this disclaimer on anything you say, or like every piece of advice you give, or yeah, it's almost like there's this immediate, and it's not to say that it's the case. I actually don't think there's like a universal rule. It depends on your relationship with people and whatever. But it does feel like there's like, it automatically adds that caveat to, like, oh yeah, like also, but keep in mind like this part about this guy, like he might have some really good ideas about like JavaScript or whatever, but also keep this thing in mind, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Built
So
that like separates us actually, right?
yeah, it's almost like you're kind of like, you're almost kind of like like voluntarily voluntarily disclosing some broken part about yourself, which, like, let me put it this way, like there's like, I'm going to try and keep it vague, but there's like a pretty well-known YouTuber, specifically in the tech world and so forth, who also did a video where he kind of shared quite openly about like his past and whatever, and I could almost feel like that same like dynamic in myself, like listening to that, being like, and I'm trying to be honest here, in an ideal world I would want to say that, like, no, like, like kumbaya, but like there was that initial bit of like, shoo, wow, I don't know like how I feel about this guy now that I know this. Yeah, and I don't know, it's tough, man. It's tough. I do think like there is a risk to being open about this stuff. The question just is that risk, is the kind of like the meaningfulness of being open about it, and like putting this part of yourself out there. There's like a level of like meaningfulness to that, and kind of like a alignment of your who you are. But like there is also risk, and I oftentimes wonder if, and I think we spoke about this either the last session or the one before that, is whether if things weren't, if we weren't in this tech bubble where like you were basically guaranteed a job if you could just write some basic code, whether I would have actually taken that step to be open about this. If we haven't had the last 5 years play out the way it did, and instead had an industry that was very competitive, where it's like, shoo, you just need to hold on to your job, if we weren't in a place where like recruiters were just like spamming your inbox, whether I would have had the courage to actually be open about this and worry about job prospects, and probably not. So it's interesting that created a dynamic where I could be open about this and not have to worry too much about like, is this gonna, I don't know if I would still be open about it if the industry was like it is right now, when I decided to be open about this and so forth. Yeah. Um, which I think brings me to a specific question for you, Geoff, is have you ever felt that there's a possible danger of like career implications to being open about this?
Um, Thankfully, no. It was interesting actually because when I was going through that time right before I published my initial post on it, um, I was on the phone with a colleague, and he's like, "Hey Jeff, you don't look the same. Like you okay? Things going on." I said, "Actually, no. You know what? I have this like draft sitting in my in my box here, and I'm just gonna hit publish on it." So I did it right there. I said, "You know what? Hold on." I published it, then I sent him the link. I said, "Nope, I'm not doing okay here." And that's how the post was published. So that made my decision a lot easier because again, I'm too lazy to explain it to somebody or like email or text them. So I'm just going to publish it and send them a link. So yeah, there is, a lot of empathy, with the clients and the teams that I've worked with over time. That have been very cool about this stuff. And if you work in a place that doesn't understand or empathize or realize that this industry is very susceptible to mental health concerns, you're probably going to want to find another employer at some point in time because these are the employers that are going to milk you dry. They're going to make you burn the candle at both ends and force you to sacrifice whatever sanity you actually have in you. But yeah, I've never suffered any like negative outcome. Like I'm one of those people. It's like I think sharing, and shedding light on something is a benefit. And in that whatever stigmas that get attached to us in the process, those tend to be like more in our mind than anything else. It's sort of like when you're having a conversation with someone, you're kind of wondering, oh, are they looking at my hair or shoot, oh, I wore this really dumb shirt. Oh, I have a stain on it. I did, do they see that? But really, they're not paying attention to you, that closely. And I think that kind of context, yeah, sure, they're gonna know this thing about you now, but they're not going to focus on it. I think that's largely in our minds that we just add that to our persona on top of whatever else we've like bagged away in our lives. So for me, sharing has been incredibly good, and but then again, I'm so biased on this side because my whole career's on blogging and like openness and like communicating and just, especially on a site like CSS Tricks or Smashing Magazine, like these are sites that talk about journeys, like we don't say like, oh, we're the primary expert on this topic and because I'm publishing this, I'm the authority on it. No, it's this is what I'm learning. This is what I've figured out. And it's exciting to me. I hope it's exciting to you too. Hey, how do you use this? Like, do you notice anything that I didn't catch here or something? Because it's all a learning process and we're all in this thing together. And again, it is a big place where we all bring these perspectives and learn from each other. Your learning is a learning style, and it is an effective way to learn too. But in an industry that prides itself on individualism and competition and climbing ladders, and just knowing all the answers to all things, whether you're on the front or back end or claim to be both, we tend to shovel that stuff under and not talk about it or shed light on it because we're afraid that that's going to tarnish our the images that we've curated for ourselves. But again, that's just another form of armor that we put on ourselves for protection and vulnerability. I think is the goal at the end of the day. That's how we break these facades. Is the facades at the end of the day aren't very healthy, and that's what I've learned over time and through many years of counseling. Still in it, and yeah, I would just say that whatever fears someone might have about coming out about this sort of thing, like, yeah, there are real risks there, but I find that they tend to be a little overblown of sorts because people do want to care for you at the end of the day, and when they realize that you're suffering something existential, um, there tends to be a lot more understanding there is what I've found. So even even like coming out on this stuff, to my mom, to my wife, to my kids even. Um, it's amazing how much support I've actually gained in the process, and I haven't lost any support. So maybe my experience is unique there, but if you think that there's even a possibility that you can build a support network by being honest, I'd say take it.
Yeah, and I mean, talking to that, I spoke to Jennifer Weiss from Mission Save a Life. Like she works at Microsoft, but she started this nonprofit. And I mean, the reason she started that was because of this veneer of perfection that's painted on top of humans. Maybe social media, as always, has played a big role in this, but I think just media in general has played a role in this. Um, in making it seem like you have to put forward this perfect you. Because, I mean, what happened there was essentially it's these young college kids. They had scholarships thanks to, sport and all these kinds of things. So from the outside, it looks like the popular guys, going to college and on a sports scholarship, like everything's grand. Turns out the one dude's friend was so unhappy and so depressed that he took his own life. And one of the reasons that happened was afterwards when she spoke to her son, whose best friend committed suicide. Um, he said it's because none of us feel comfortable to talk about this to one another. And these are best friends that are too scared to bring this vulnerable aspect of themselves up. And through that, they're losing the support network that they could have had by being vulnerable with their friends and saying, you know what, I don't know what the hell's going on, but I'm seriously considering ending my life. And somebody being saying, whoa, um, tell me more about it. Is there anything I can do? What do you need from me? That kind of thing. There's obviously, and the thing is, if we don't do that, we don't learn how to react in these situations because I remember I heard somebody like say, we're all panel beaters looking for a car to fix. So as soon as a broken car shows up, we want to fix it. And often in those situations, when somebody's considering suicide, the last thing they want is a bunch of advice from you. They kind of want somebody to just say, whoa, okay, tell me more.
Exactly.
And just shut up. And that's what like Jennifer told me. Just tell me more and shut up and let them speak. Um, but if we don't talk about this, if we don't address the cow or the whatever in the room, uh, and people don't know how to react to this. First of all, people don't talk about it, but when they do, the person on the other side doesn't know how to respond to it because it's this weird taboo thing that, oh, you should go see a psychiatrist because I don't know what to do. And then they feel like, oh shit, now I was vulnerable, and now all that happened is now somebody else knows about my situation, and now it's weird between us, and that doesn't help. That doesn't help. So I think it's important, like you said, to like talk about this stuff, share these things, and of course you don't want to do this all the time because, like Schalk said, then people will be like, oh, I don't want to go to this person because every time I go there, they talk about how depressed they are, and then I get depressed. But I think if you talk about it more openly, it's not such a big thing anymore. And you won't end up talking about it as much because it's kind of out there and people are aware of the situation, and it's not a focal point anymore. I think it's like, for me, it's like, because I had problems with alcohol and consuming more than I needed to in a lifetime. Um, when I stopped drinking, then you have to tell people about it at every situation. And when it's this thing, then it becomes the focal point. And I've had the same experience with the vegetarian, like not eating meat. Like every time you bring it up, it's this focal point where everybody's like, "Oh, that's weird." Da da da. But once you've said it and it's out there, and people are like, "Okay, he doesn't drink alcohol," then the next time it's not such a big deal. It's like, you know, maybe if you're in a crowd, some other people don't know. Maybe it'll come up and say like, "Oh yeah, don't offer him a beer because he doesn't drink." But over time, it becomes less and less and less of a focal point. There's going to be this period of a little bit of weirdness and a little bit of strangeness, but I think over time it kind of evens out, and then it becomes more okay. So if somebody else is going through it, they'll be less worried about sharing that, you know what, I think I should stop too because my life is out of control and it's because of abuse or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and recognizing what those triggers are for when you're not okay, right? And when to say something about it. Yeah, you know, for me, the big revelation with mental health, just awareness for myself, even is just realizing that we all have these little voices in our heads, right? And they're all, they're always providing us feedback with something. You know, I remember listening to an episode of the Hidden Brain podcast way back when, and it was talking about like, hey, how to become friends with your inner voice. And I'm like, oh, that sounds like something I should be listening to. Let me try that. And yeah, it was pretty darn awesome because for me, it opened the eyes to the fact that I just don't treat myself very, very well. If you were to to I guess amplify what my mind is telling me out loud to everyone else, it would look like a very abusive marriage. I am constantly berating myself for not being good enough. I'm berating myself for any time I make a simple mistake. I I've even gotten physical with myself, and that's I mean, you are stuck in an abusive relationship. That's what it is. And to any other person looking outside, if that little voice was an actual human in a situation, you'd want to intervene in that situation and say, "Get away from that person. They're going to hurt you." Um, but we all have that in our heads, and I have had no control over that voice for so long, and that voice, is the culmination of lots of past experiences in life, and yeah, it is abusing you, but it's also there because it thinks it's keeping you safe, right? It's saying, "Don't mess up like this because then you're gonna get berated by so and so for forgetting to do such and such," right? So it's actually a defensive mechanism there, but at the same time, it's abusing you and making you feel worse at the same moment. So for me, it's, been giving a name to this voice, and I just kinda call it my my chatty Aunt Kathy in there, and it's like so anytime I start saying like, Jeff, you're such a fucking idiot or something, and I go, shut up, Kathy, like that, it's like, okay, 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 it's all gone. Because it is when you personify it like that, and it means you can laugh about it a little bit and recognize it for what it is, which is an invisible voice that is inside of you that you can control. Because if it can be created, you can destroy it too. And because yeah, that Hidden Brain podcast, gosh, I just have to go back to that because one of the points that the guest made on there was so poignant to me. It was this idea that we have this voice in our heads and then it does berate us, but we can actually or what it's actually supposed to be used for is short-term memory, right? The voices in our heads are supposed to help us remember when we go from one room to another or something. Be like, oh, remember to go get the pencil, off your desk, and then you walk downstairs and go, wait a second, what did I come down here for? Well, probably because you're, chatty Aunt Kathy, whatever is too busy berating you, that you forget, that stupid pencil on your desk. And then what happens when you forget that pencil? You berate yourself again, right? So it's kind of like the infinite loop of junk, that just compounds upon itself. And before you know it, you're having suicidal ideation. And if I highly suspect that most people listening to this, like not only empathize with it, but have personal experiences with this. But anyone who doesn't, it can sound silly. Like, dude, it's a voice in your head. You can say whatever you want. I'm sorry, but you just don't have control over some of that stuff. And, the way that we process things, like some of us are just stuck in deep thinking. And that's my problem. I get into deep thinking pathways that I just can't break. And so I can't make new associations in my brain, like neural pathways for new insights and new conclusions to things that I'm stuck in and ruminating on all the time. And these just get louder and louder. So it becomes again this infinite loop that it's tough to break. It's a cycle. And yeah, if it's so easy, then why is it so hard for anyone to leave an abusive relationship? It's the same concept. Like we have to find ways to get out of this abusive relationship, and it's not as easy as it looks.
Hi, this is Other Schalk. If it felt to you that this episode ended kind of abruptly, that is because this was part one of our two-part conversation with Geoff. Our conversation ended up going for close to 2.5 hours, and so we thought it best to split the episode into two parts. We hope you enjoyed part one. Part two will be published next week, but we have a clip for you from part two. Thank you for listening, and we will speak to you soon.
It also meant like crap. I have to kind of rediscover things, and what I learned in that process, whether it's right or wrong or healthy or not, that I think CSS tricks, I made it too big a part of my life. I really, really cared about that site a lot. And it was, the thing that I woke up to do in the morning. It got me out of bed. And I put a little too many emotional eggs in that one basket, and so having it pulled away from me and having loved it, yeah, I was very resentful. And I had to go through, several stages of grief, to deal with this. And because it's partly my livelihood, it's partly a passion project, it's my hobby, it's my well-being, it's how I provide for my family, it's all these things, and like it's too interconnected into all areas of my life, and so losing that just really felt like I was losing a big part of myself, as silly as that might sound.